Florida gained over 700,000 new residents in a single year. That was 2022. In 2025, more people left Florida than moved in for the first time in a decade. Most of those people were retirees, the same ones who sold everything to get there. This isn't a housing story. It's not even a weather story, really. It's about a retirement dream that got repriced in real time by insurance companies, by the climate, and by a cost of living that snuck up on people who were living on fixed incomes and no longer had room to adapt. And here's what most people still don't know. The ones leaving aren't panicking. They're quiet about it. They're just gone. Home insurance in Florida has become something most retirees didn't budget for. The average homeowner's premium in Florida hit $10,000 a year in 2024. That's not a typo. That's not Miami Beach waterfront. That's Sarasota. That's Port Charlotte. That's the neighborhoods retirees moved to specifically because they seemed affordable. Picture a couple who sold their Ohio home for $280,000. They bought in Florida for $340,000. Felt like a stretch, but manageable. Then their insurance tripled. Then their HOA raised fees. Then their carrier pulled out of the state entirely. They didn't make a dramatic announcement. One day there's a U-Haul in the driveway. A week later, the house is listed. 13 insurance companies have left Florida since 2022. The ones that stayed raised rates to cover what the ones that left couldn't. The summers got longer, and nobody told them how bad it had gotten. July in Bonita Springs now means heat index readings above 110 degrees for weeks at a stretch. Retirees moving for the sunshine are spending June through September entirely indoors. Some can't go outside before 7 a.m. or after 6 p.m. with real risk. One thing nobody talks about in the retirement brochures: heat doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it accelerates health conditions. Cardiologists in Florida have been quietly flagging this for years. Elderly patients moving to hot climates don't always do better. Sometimes the heat makes existing conditions harder to manage, and the humidity is its own problem. The dream was morning walks by the water. The reality is blackout curtains and a $400 electric bill. Here's what most people miss about Florida's property tax situation. When retirees first move in, Florida looks like a tax haven. No state income tax. Save Our Homes cap limits how much assessed value can rise each year. Sounds protected. What the data actually shows is that the cap only applies to your primary residence after your first year. The year you move in, you're assessed at full market value, and market values in Florida ran up 40 to 60% in some counties between 2020 and 2023. People retired on a budget built around 2019 Florida prices. They're now paying taxes on 2023 Florida prices. The people who saw this coming bought years earlier or had unusually high fixed incomes. Everyone else is doing the math and realizing the math doesn't work anymore.
The story behind Florida's flooding problem is more interesting than the headline. Most people think flooding is a coastal issue. Storm surge, beachfront erosion, sure. But what nobody talks about is that inland Florida floods too, regularly. And the drainage infrastructure in many of the retirement communities built in the 1980s and 1990s was never designed for current rainfall patterns. Here's what the data actually shows. FEMA remapped flood zones across Florida in 2022 and 2023. Thousands of properties that were never in flood zones suddenly were. Mandatory flood insurance on top of regular homeowners insurance pushed total annual premiums past $15,000 for some residents. One couple in the Villages, not a coastal town, 40 miles from any ocean, got their flood zone notice in 2023. Their flood insurance alone, $4,800 a year. They were not expecting that conversation. Smart retirees who researched this before buying looked specifically at elevation certificates. Most didn't know that was something they needed to look at. And this next one surprised even me. If you've been finding this useful, subscribing takes 2 seconds, and the next few items are the ones nobody's talking about yet. What nobody talks about is what happens to healthcare costs when you're no longer near a major metro. A lot of retirees move to smaller Florida markets: Punta Gorda, Inverness, Sebring, quiet towns, lower prices, slower pace. What they didn't account for is specialist access. Florida has a severe shortage of geriatric care physicians outside of major metro areas. Cardiologists, neurologists, orthopedic surgeons, the doctors retirees actually need are concentrated in Tampa, Miami, and Orlando. Driving 2 hours each way for a specialist appointment sounds manageable until you're doing it every 6 weeks, until your spouse can't drive anymore, until the appointment runs long and you're on the highway after dark. Some retirees are now paying for concierge medicine just to get reliable access to a primary care doctor. That wasn't in the budget either. Here's what most people miss about where these retirees are actually going. The assumption is they're going back to where they came from, back to Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania. The data tells a different story. The top destination for Florida retirees leaving the state right now is North Carolina, then Tennessee, then Georgia. They're not going back north, they're going to lower-cost Sunbelt states with milder summers, lower insurance rates, and better Medicaid access. States that look like the Florida of 15 years ago, before the prices caught up. The people who spotted this pattern early bought in Asheville, in Chattanooga, in Savannah, before those markets moved. A few of them are now watching the same wave of Florida refugees arrive and drive up their new town's home prices. The cycle is just moving. The story behind HOA fees in Florida retirement communities is more layered than it looks. After Hurricane Ian in 2022, Florida passed new laws requiring HOA associations to fully fund their reserves. It was a safety law. The Surfside collapse was still fresh. Nobody argued against it publicly. But the financial hit landed entirely on residents. HOA associations that had been collecting minimal reserves for decades suddenly had to make up the shortfall immediately. In some communities, HOA fees doubled overnight. In others, they tripled. One community in Fort Myers sent residents a notice, a one-time special assessment of $50,000 per unit, due within 18 months. Retirees on fixed incomes don't have $50,000 sitting available. The ones who didn't have it had one option: sell quickly into a market that was already softening. The for sale signs in some Florida retirement communities are starting to stack up. In parts of Lee County, active listings are up more than 80% compared to 2 years ago. Days on market are stretching longer. Price cuts are showing up in neighborhoods where houses used to sell in a weekend. The buyers who came in 2021 and 2022 are now listing at prices that barely cover what they paid. Some are listing below. They need out more than they need to profit. It's quiet. No headlines, no news segment, just a slow, steady pressure that you'd only notice if you were watching the listings. There's a pattern running through all of this that has nothing to do with Florida specifically. It's about what happens when a place gets priced for a dream that was built on old numbers. The insurance math changed, the climate math changed, the healthcare math changed, and none of those changes waited for anyone's retirement timeline. The question isn't whether Florida is still a good place to retire. Some people are doing fine. The question is, what are you building your plan on, and when did those numbers last get updated?